Well, hello there. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thanks for joining. You are at Stop the Drama using the facts framework for difficult conversations. I'm your host, Dina Lynch Eisenberg. I am also the founder of Talkola, the first and only conflict simulator micro learning environment for healthcare professionals to learn how to master hard conversations. Before we jump in, I just want to give you a little bit of advice on how to maximize the value of this presentation. Watch the whole thing. It really is helpful to watch from beginning to end, and each one of the workshops in the four workshop series builds upon the next. So you want to make sure you get every little bit of knowledge and information out of the video. Have a specific work situation in mind that you want to resolve. This works so much better when it's not a hypothetical, when you're really thinking about what's going on in your practice. Maybe an issue's come up currently, or it's one in the past that you want to revisit, that you can work through using the framework that we talked about. Do the exercises, please. I know it's like, homework. I don't want to. Well, do them because you will find that while this seems very simple, that when you actually have to sit down and write out the steps or write out your expectations, it's a little bit more complicated than you thought. And so this is just an opportunity for you to practice. Send us feedback. I really want to know what you think about the workshop. I've tried to make it entertaining but packed full of actionable information. I want to hear what you liked. I also want to hear what you didn't like or what you wish was included, because we're always looking to optimize things so that you have the best experience. And if you have a topic that you think would make an amazing Stop the Drama workshop, I want to hear about that. So shoot me a note at Dina@Talkola.com. So the agenda, we're going to be together for approximately 60 minutes. Settle in, get a glass of water. You definitely need a piece of paper and a pen because there's going to be lots of notes for you to take. We're going to be talking about what is shadow friction. You've experienced it for sure, but now we're going to define it for you so you actually know. We're going to talk about those first 5 minutes, how to begin to prepare to have that difficult conversation so that you feel confident and ready for it. And then we're going to work through using the facts framework so that you have a container, if you will, to put your conversation in. You have a step by step guide of things you're going to do every single time that you have a difficult conversation. And that's useful so that you make sure that you're consistent and comfortable and feeling confident as you work through the conversation. Now, this is a regular day in we're just a brand new dental group. This is Alex. She's the office manager. And this is what she's hearing this morning. Marissa is saying, Danielle, those instruments were supposed to be cleaned and bagged last night. What happened with that? And then we hear Danielle saying, yeah, but I stayed late last night finishing up the x-rays. I was really tired. It had been a long day, so I really thought I could wait until the morning. That is the beginning of the tension breaking out. Both of these ladies really believe they're right, and they're going to be starting to exhibit some shadow friction. They're going to be avoiding each other. They're going to be giving looks and rolling the eyes. There's going to be some sighing, maybe some neck rolling, the whole deal. It's going to be clear that there's tension between it. If it's clear to you that there's tension, it's also clear to patients. And that patients really don't like to sense tension in a team. It makes them uncomfortable, and they begin to think that they need to be at a different practice. So you want to minimize the tension that any patients feel from your practice. So let's talk a little bit about what is shadow friction. You already know what it is. but maybe you haven't heard this term. I coined this term to describe what I've noticed over 30 years of being an organizational ombud for organizations from banking, like Bank of America, to healthcare, like St. Jude's Research Children's Hospital, to tech, like Twitter. There's always some shadow friction going on. And what is it exactly? Shadow friction is an action, a thought, a belief that causes you to think differently about the person that you had a relationship, a coworker, right? It's usually born out of the idea of being annoyed or frustrated or some slight, and it's not big enough to raise to you the level of having a conversation, but you're still mad. You're still frustrated. You're still have that I can't believe you did that shaking your head feeling. So a good example is that Charlotte and Betty disagree about how to do a clinical procedure. One is kind of old school, one is kind of new school. Both of them think they're right. Next thing you know, one starts avoiding the other because it's like there's no talking to her. The communication breaks down, and then your team starts to take sides. This one's right, that one's right. I think Betty is right. I think Charlotte's right. Then that feeling, that attitude, that vibe infects the whole team. And before you know it, you have lots of people not talking to each other in a very tense environment. Shadow friction isn't like loud conflict. There's no yelling, there's no screaming. You're not going to notice it because there's noise. You're not going to notice it because there's yelling. You're going to notice it because it's quiet. There's silence, but you still feel that underlying tension going on. You can tell just by reading the room that folks are not getting along. That's shadow friction. What's the cost of ignoring friction? Well, increased mistrust and decreased engagement. When people don't feel comfortable, psychologically safe in an environment, then they just check out. And they're not going to trust anybody. And that impacts you in a couple of different ways. When you have a lot of mistrust in your system, you're not going to get the day-to-day collaboration that you need to run a practice effectively. People aren't going to be volunteering to pitch in to teach the new person how to do something or jumping in to help somebody when they see they're swamped because they're not talking to that person and they just don't want to help them. So you're going to get less collaboration, less productivity. You're definitely going to get more burnout because the folks who are actually um, talking to folks and not intention are now the ones who are doing up all the work and are picking up the slack. And they feel tired, they feel frustrated, and they feel angry that you're not doing something about it and making life easier for them, which actually leads to the turnover. So I know there's lots of reasons why in a practice folks might be avoiding or ignoring the friction because maybe you're the doctor or owner and you would just want everybody to get along. You think, well, if I'm just going to leave it alone until things clear themselves up. And many a time I've had an owner say to me, things will blow over. And what I like to tell them in response is, well, if you're expecting things to blow over, you should also expect them to blow up because negativity in a practice is kind of like toxic sludge. You can bury it, but it's still there, and eventually it's going to bubble up and get you. So you really don't want to ignore the cost of friction because if you just lose one hygienist, the replacement cost is between $55,000 to $80,000 for one. Now imagine you go through the year and you're losing four hygienists. That's a significant hit to your bottom line and your EBITDA. So you don't want to ignore the friction. You want to be prepared to respond to it. First 5 minutes. Let's talk to Alex about those first 5 minutes. That's when you realize I got to have the conversation and you're about to have it and you are, let's be frank, freaking out because you're not certain what to say, what to do. We're going to help you through that. The first thing that you really want to think about is calming yourself down. Inhale deeply to the count of five. Exhale deeply to the count of five and do that 3 or 4 times until you start to feel that your shoulders come down, your breath even out, and you relax a little bit. Then that allows your brain to actually think and not be in flight or fight mood. Was it flight or yeah, flight or fight? So you're gonna want to be in a place where you feel calm. You're not looking to escape, that you can focus on what's going on. Then you're gonna ask yourself, what is my purpose of having this conversation? Now think about that. How often in life do you stop and ask yourself, what is the purpose of this conversation? We just kind of assume that not only do we know the purpose, but the other person knows the purpose. And that is not always true. So you want to make sure that you know, what kind of conversation is this, right? Am I trying to deliver a message? Am I trying to learn something? Am I trying to fix something? What's the purpose, the outcome that you're looking for at the end of this meeting? And if you're worried because you don't have the words, don't worry about it. No one has the words right away. It's a matter of practicing and being in the stance of being collaborative and curious and responding to what you're hearing and asking questions. So that takes a little bit of practice. The way that you can shortcut that right now is to think about it this way. Think about, what is it that I want this person to feel like after the conversation. Because if your purpose in having the conversation is to gather information and find a solution, and you want that person to feel empowered and energized after the conversation, those thoughts are definitely going to inform the words that you choose in the conversation. So you're already setting yourself up to have a successful conversation when you know your purpose and you know how you want the person to feel. And if you want to, think about how you want to feel at the end. Do you want to feel accomplished? Do you want to feel happy? Do you want to feel relief? That adds into it too. What is a preamble? It's the beginning of the conversation. Now that you've set your mindset and you're ready to go, you actually have to say something, right? And so the preamble is once again a chance for you to calm down. It's also a chance for the other person to sort of take a beat too. You want to be able to set out the goals for the talk. That's the purpose we just talked about. And really, you're trying to signal that this is not a conversation where the person is going to get into trouble, right? It's not that kind of feedback or performance conversation. This is a conversation where it's open and we are both collectively, jointly looking for a solution to an issue that has come up. That really goes a long way in sort of easing the defensiveness, because most of the time what we say to somebody else is, hey, we have to talk, can I get you to talk later on? And that strikes fear into the hearts of men and women. I don't know anybody who's heard those words, we need to talk, and thought it was a good thing. So you want to avoid saying it that way, and then you want to use your preamble to invite the person to the conversation. Because when you say something like, we need to talk, what you're actually doing is demanding their attention. And I don't know any adults who like to have demands made on them. Right. So when you're using your preamble, it's not a demand for a conversation. It's an invitation to join a conversation. And you're explaining the purpose of the conversation and what you're hoping to get out of it. And by spending a few extra minutes to do the preamble, what you're doing is laying that foundation for psychological safety. So that person can now relax a little bit and focus on, what is the conversation, what's the purpose, and how can I contribute to this conversation without being defensive. Here's how it works. You're going to share your purpose. I noticed that yesterday you came in late, and I'd like a little bit more information about that. You're not in trouble. I'm sure we can find a way to work out a great solution. Would you be open to having a brief conversation today at 5:30 at the end of the day? Right? That is your preamble. Less than 20 words. Very easy, very short, very direct. I guess as they would say on TikTok, very demure. So here's your first bit of exercise. I want you to Stop and pause and reflect. Think about a conversation you had that went sideways. Maybe it's a recent conversation. Maybe it's the one that you picked to work on during this workshop. How did you start that conversation? Did you say we have to talk? It's okay if you did because you just didn't know, but now you know better. What I want you to do is take a minute and write a short preamble, less than 25 words, to invite a person to a conversation. And feel free to use that scenario that you picked at the beginning of the workshop. Got it? Don't worry if you didn't write it all down. You'll be able to come back to it later. Just when you get to start doing that as a regular part of your preparation for having conversations. Because the care you show your team and how you talk to them, how you think about them, how you interact with them is the same care that they are going to give to patients. We forget that sometimes. Often you hear people say hurt people hurt people. That's a true statement. So if you want people to be better in how they treat others, treat them better. Empowered people empower others. Creating psychological safety. I know that word has been thrown around a lot, but it's important. It's an important element of having a healthy organization, one that is adaptable and has low conflict and high psychological safety. In 1954, Carl Rogers coined the term psychological safety, and it's really the focus is whether or not the person feels comfortable opening up and speaking up and sharing something without the fear of getting a negative consequence, right? So, can people in your workplace say, I don't know how to do something, or say, I made a mistake, or bring up something that's troubling them? Maybe it's a compliance issue, maybe it's an infection control issue, without getting a negative consequence from you or anybody else for doing that. You want to create an environment where that is the standard. Everybody knows that there's a expectation that they're going to speak up and that you have created policies and systems for them to do that easily and privately if they want to. Organizations that have psychological safety are 50% more productive and have 27% less turnover. In the dental space today, 27% less turnover is the biggest blessing ever. And in fact, just go on record in saying that when you work on increasing your retention assurance, something you can do with Talkola, that's really increasing your competitive edge because most other practices and groups are not focusing on people first. They're not trying to create communication systems that make for a healthier environment. And so they're losing their folks. And that when you can create a community, I hate the word culture, it's a buzzword, an overhyped one at that. A community is a group of people who share a value, and that's true for your practice because you all share the value of excellent patient care. So when you all share the value in that community, you want to make sure that your community is safe, that people feel like they can speak up, that they feel seen and heard, and that they feel celebrated and valued. It really is a competitive edge to increase the amount of psychological safety in your practice, and it has a financial impact that can't be denied. So, name 5 areas where psychological safety is important in your practice. I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. This is where I wish I had the Jeopardy music. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, hope you have a couple written down on your paper. For those who are like, I'm not certain, let's see if we can give you a couple answers. Psychological safety is important, certainly in patient and dentist interactions. If you have somebody who has dental anxiety, you absolutely want to make sure that they feel safe speaking up. I heard the story the other day where a man went to the dentist and he wasn't feeling completely numb, and he didn't feel comfortable saying that. And so he went through the entire procedure in pain because he was afraid of what would happen if he spoke up and said he wasn't numb enough. So you want to make sure that patients feel safe. Innovation, you're not going to get any new ideas in your practice unless people feel safe suggesting things and knowing that if it doesn't work out, that they're not going to get a consequence from that. Training new skills is so important for psychological safety. Adults need to understand process and to do it a few times before they master it. But if you haven't really connected the idea that training is different from integration, you might have some issues. So you want to make sure that people are feeling comfortable saying, I didn't get it, or I don't understand it, and even I don't like it. Because oftentimes I hear practices say, we got this software and nobody's using it. And if I dig a little deeper, I hear the reason nobody's using it is because they weren't asked in advance whether or not it was going to be useful for them, whether the features fit what they needed, right? So again, just proving why psychological safety is so important. It opens so many doors, it touches so many aspects of your practice that when it's present, it can be an accelerator, but when it's lacking, it causes all kinds of problems. So, recap, you learned about shadow friction. It's the quiet, unexpressed conflict that really is dragging down the vibe in your practice. It's that ugly, mucky feeling. It's that walking on eggshell thing that you really want to get rid of as quickly as you can. And you're going to do that by having conversations with people. You discover the first 5 minutes that really it's all about setting your purpose and setting an intention around the feelings that you want to come out of the conversation. Those feelings are your feelings and the other person's feelings. And now you have the ability to create your own preamble, the way that you're actually going to start the conversation. And remember, it's an invitation to have a conversation. It's not a demand. So Danielle and Marissa, once again, they are beefing. What are you going to do? I love the ladies. They both got their hands on their shoulder, their hips. So sassy. You're going to use the facts framework. Now, I developed the facts framework really over the course of my career, working with individuals and organizations who, typically a manager, who was having difficulty communicating with somebody on their team. We all start at different places in our conflict management journey. And if you really haven't taken conflict management training, it can be hard to figure out where to start. And so we use our natural abilities. How do we talk to our family? How do we talk to our friends? And while it's fine for those folks, it might not be the best approach in the workplace. And so I wanted to give you the facts framework, easy to remember. And once you master it, you'll always be able to have the conversation with somebody, even if it's a little difficult. So it's flag the issue, assess the impact, clarify expectations, termination triggers, start and sustain. So let's see if we can walk through that a little bit more. Flagging the issue. What is the real issue? What's the problem? It might be what somebody presents to you in a meeting. I noticed somebody doing blah blah blah, or you might notice it yourself. But you want to make sure that you're identifying what is the actual issue. And it's not about blaming anybody else, really just trying to figure out what's going on. So you should think of this as a hypothesis, right? You're making an observation. You don't know you're right, but you're trying to find out. It's about being curious because obviously in a busy practice, you cannot be everywhere all the time. You're not going to see everything. Things are going to happen that you know nothing about, right? And so you can't assume that you know what happened because you just know the people and you know how they act. That is somewhat unfair. You want to make sure that you are trying to find out what actually happened by asking questions during the conversation. And you want to keep it brief when you're flagging the issue. You want to make sure that when you're talking about it with teammates, that you can specifically define what the problem is. Vagueness really leads to mistrust. So if you say to someone, well, you're just not good at interacting with people, that's a pretty vague statement. As someone hearing that, I would not know what to do to correct that situation. I need some direction. So when you're flagging the issue, try to be specific. Now, another reflection. What small, repeatable pattern have you noticed lately in the practice? And could you flag that as an observation? So, what I want you to do is write a short flag statement that shares your observation in a neutral, non judgmental way. That's the hard part. I'll give you a couple seconds. Good job. Assess the impact. So, you have an idea what the thing is that's happening. What is the result of that thing happening? What's the impact to the business, to the team, to the financials, to the patient? What is happening as a result of this behavior? And it really is thinking about what's the outcome that we need to correct, right? So the person, your teammate, understands why they have to make the change. You could just say change, but adults generally need a reason why before they can change. And assessing the impact gives you the information to share the why. Now, when you're sharing the why, let's be a little careful. You're not sharing a motive about the why, or actually the outcome. You're not sharing the motive about the outcome. So, for instance, if an assistant comes to you and says, hey, the other assistant is lazy, you're not going to say when you have the conversation, hey, you're lazy, right? Because that's just going to lead to defensiveness. What you're going to do is try to understand that. I've noticed that maybe you're taking more breaks than before, and I'd like to learn more information about that. Or, some of your colleagues have mentioned to me that you're spending a lot of time in the break room or on your phone, and I want to learn a little bit more about that. Right? But you're not calling the person lazy or slacker. You're just asking. So don't attach a motive to the outcome. And the outcome in both those situations is people are upset and feel like the work equity is not happening, that not everybody is pulling their weight. So that's the impact of somebody who might be on their phone more often than not. So, the issue that you flagged earlier. What was the impact of that? Take a minute to write that down. And as you're writing, remember you're going to be using neutral, non judgmental words to say the impact. So it might be something like, Jenny, I noticed you coming in late every day last week, and I'd like to learn more about that. The impact of lateness when any of us are late is that it throws the schedule off, and that really is disruptive for patients. So I want to talk more about it with you. Right? Recap. You learned about the facts framework, an easy way to prepare for a difficult conversation. You discovered how to flag the issue, and you practiced assessing the impact. Good for you. Let me just give you a little demo. Oh, actually, this is Alex, the office manager, giving you a little demo. Danielle, I noticed that you and Marissa aren't getting along like you used to. I want to ensure we work together as a team. You're not in trouble. Would you be open to a brief chat after lunch today? When there's tension between team members, patients sense that and it makes them uncomfortable. Some don't come back, which is bad for business. A very, what was that, 30-second statement that invites Danielle to come to a conversation. Clarifying expectations. Really, the whole thing about expectations is alignment. If you don't know what the expectation is, you cannot possibly meet it. And I find in lots of practices, there are values shared, but not always the expectations on how to live that value. And so you want to be really clear about saying what the expectation is and what it looks like in real life. And if you're using particular words, you want to be careful because some words are what I call suitcase words. They have to be unpacked because they have many meanings or different meanings. So a good example is the word professional. That word causes so much trouble because it means something different to each person. And so if you say, I expect you to all to act professionally with patients, that's a word that you really want to unpack. Make sure you're not using empty calorie words like do better. Right? There's no meat on that bone. When you say someone do better, it isn't really actionable and it's certainly not helpful because it doesn't give them any direction. Expectations really are about being transparent. Things change over time, and as they change, we get busy. So you might forget to reset expectations, but it's a good idea to reset them on a quarterly basis so everybody's on the same page, both the legacy team and any new hires that you have. So I want you to name 4 expectations for how your team members should interact with patients, coworkers, or managers. Was that difficult? Looking at your list, what do you think is missing? Termination triggers. This may seem a little bit odd. Why are we thinking about termination triggers? Well, first of all, it's important to do it because it's really a very hard conversation to terminate someone, to separate them from the practice. You want to make sure that before you go into this conversation, you already know what would be behavior that would cause you to believe that the person is not a good fit for the role or for your practice in general. You want to know that beforehand so that you're not left trying to make that decision or determine that during or just after the conversation. And it's really not about firing somebody or getting ready to fire someone. It's really about setting a boundary for yourself because again, it's difficult to draw that line and know when it's time to let someone go and release them. And so you want to give yourself some guidelines and a little bit of grace. It's also about respect, right? So that you can let people know what's going to be acceptable. And so if they cross over the line, they know where the line is and they know they can expect a consequence. If you never set the expectations and you don't let them know what a termination trigger is, people can be feeling confused about what kind of behavior might get them released. So in your mind, you want to be thinking about what kind of behaviors. And a good example of this is I worked with an organization where they had lots of information about behaviors in terms of the business that would get you separated. Don't share patient information. Uh, be sure you're doing all the infection protocols, those kinds of things. But what they didn't have was any expectation around honesty. There was no rule or practice or policy that said that team members, community members, had to be honest. Now, for me, that's just a natural given, right? You have to set that expectation, and so there wasn't a termination trigger for that. People could lie and still not be separated. So just something to think about. Like, have we covered all our bases when we're thinking about termination triggers and all our values? Just a reminder that setting a termination trigger is not a threat. This is not something you're going to be saying to the person in your community, right? This is something that you're thinking about from your side of things. And it's setting that boundary is holding people accountable, but without shaming them, right? Because everybody has a shared goal to excel at patient care, and that's really what you want them to live up to. So, name 4 termination triggers that might lead to separation after your private conversation. And if that turns out to be hard for you, think about why it feels hard. All right, so let's go for another demo with Alex. Danielle, I want to make sure you understand our expectations. Around here, everyone pitches in when needed, regardless of title, without complaining. We support each other for the good of our patients. When someone struggles with collaborating or communicating properly, we try to help, but sometimes it's best to part ways. Start and sustain. So that's a lot of preparation and thinking, but now you're ready to start the conversation. You're prepared, you're ready to go. Remember, there's a reason why you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You need to do a lot more listening than you will do talking in this conversation. Your goal is to ask open ended questions and clarifying questions to deepen your understanding. You're going to be using good listening technique, what I call meaningful listening. You're not you're giving eye contact, but you're not staring the person down. You're giving them verbal affirmations, which is that usual, I hear you, yep, keep going. You're encouraging the person to speak by saying things like, can you say more? So that they feel like they want to continue to talk. You're leading the conversation, but you are not dominating the conversation, right? You're guiding it, but you want the other person to feel comfortable to fully participate, ask questions, share their ideas and advice or suggestions. It's a two-way street when you're having conversation, a difficult conversation. And recognize that this is the first of 2 conversations you're going to have. So it's not a one-off. You're going to have this first difficult conversation to be curious and understand what's happening. Then hopefully you're going to find a workable solution with your teammate, and then they're going to go off and do the solution. The mistake I see most people making, most managers and leaders making, is that that's it for them. They're like, okay, I told them. All right, they're going to go out and do it now. Yep, it's going to be fine. And they don't circle back. They don't follow up. They don't check in. They don't sustain the conversation. You need to sustain the conversation. Before the end of this first difficult conversation, you need to be planning for the next time you're going to get together for the next conversation, which really is to check in and review of what happened. It might be the person comes back and says, I didn't get to do it yet. Then you're going to encourage them to actually go out and do whatever it is that you both decided was a solution. If they did do it, you're going to be curious about the outcome. But this is not your opportunity to critique their performance. It's your opportunity to hear what happened. You might decide later on you want to give them a little coaching about communications, but that second conversation is not the time to do it. In that conversation, you're really just trying to cement that connection and support that person as they carry out the solution that you decided on. So here's some questions, because I know it's tough. You're like, questions, what should I ask? I've always said that questioning should be part of the educational system, because the better questions you ask, the better answers and the better outcomes you can get. And we just don't learn about asking questions. So I wanted to share a few with you. One of my favorite questions is, can you say more about that? That question is great, not only just for difficult conversations, but it is my favorite networking question too. Anytime you're like stuck for what to say to somebody at networking, and if Josh said whatever they said, you can say, can you say more about that? I'm really interested. People love to talk. And so as an introvert, it gets me out of the position of talking, gets me into listening, which is what I love to do, and lets the other person be the star for a minute. So you can ask, can you say more? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Sorry. That is the why question, right? Oftentimes I see leaders and managers wanting to get into the blame game. Like, who did that? Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Those are all why questions that can lead somebody else to be defensive. Because at some point, everybody's parents said, oh, why did you do that? What the hell were you thinking? And it was not a good thing. It had a negative connotation, and you don't want to bring out defensiveness in somebody. So instead of saying why, you can say, how did you arrive at that conclusion? What made you come to that decision? Right? Those are better why questions that don't arouse any frustration or hesitation. What would you like to see happen? This is a great question because it puts the other person, the teammate, in the driver's seat. Like they get a chance to say exactly what they'd like to see happen. Just because you ask that question doesn't mean it's going to happen that way, but you're giving the person an opportunity to share their ideal outcome. And very often, as somebody who's done mediation throughout my career and had over 100 hours of mediation training, I can tell you just asking that question opens up all kinds of possibilities because even if it's not possible to use the entire solution the person is proposing, very often there's some small part of it that you actually can do. And that makes a difference to that person. We all are much more engaged in solutions that we have a hand in creating. What are you willing to do to resolve this? Accountability, right there. We have an issue going on. We need everybody to participate in the solution. What are you willing to do? And how do you think I can be helpful? This is a question for when you have what I might consider a frequent flyer who comes to your office a lot to ask you to deal with situations with other staff members. Starting to ask that person, how do you think I can be helpful in this situation? Lets them rethink why they came to talk to you. Because often they're coming because they want to avoid the situation. They don't necessarily want to be accountable for helping find the solution or implementing it. They want somebody else. And it's fine. That's as a manager, in part, that's your job, right? To clear the deck, to remove obstacles so people can do their best work. But you're not doing anybody a service if you let them to continue to use you in that way, because we need every individual in the practice, every team member to feel conflict ready, to be able to have the mindset and skills to resolve issues by talking with the other person themselves and not triangulating and using you, right? So that's a great question when you want somebody to begin to start taking more responsibility. How do you think I can be helpful? Meaning, let's think why you want me to work on this instead of you working on it. Recap. So now you've learned all the 5 steps of FACT. Hopefully, they made a lot of sense to you when you're already beginning to think about how you can implement them tomorrow in your interactions with your team. You discovered how to start and sustain a difficult conversation. And now you have a question list, so you're not even searching around for questions. You know how to start the conversation and ask questions to get things going. So you are in a good position, my friend. I included a little cheat sheet for you. You can print this out and tack it up someplace so that next time you have to have a difficult conversation, just whip it out and check. If you went ahead and got the replay package, you also got a preamble and the 5 feedback conversations that you need to have. If you didn't grab the replay package, there'll be an opportunity later for you to do that. Dealing with conflict. I just want to throw this one in because as a society, we have a poor idea about conflict and what it is. We're certainly demonstrating that at the moment. We have a lot of misconceptions around conflict. First, you should know that conflict is inevitable. As long as there are going to be people, there's going to be conflict. We cannot reduce or eliminate all conflict. It's just not possible. And it's not useful to do that. Good ideas come out of conflict. 2 ideas in opposition is a conflict. So you might get something better from those 2 ideas. So we want to make sure that we're not saying conflict is bad, or that thinking of that if we're in conflict, that's an unusual situation. So we want to normalize that conflict happens every day to everybody. Some are little, like hitting the snooze button. Some are bigger, like maybe having to separate a teammate. But it's normal. It's part of the day to day of being a working adult. It's not necessarily negative. Conflict in and of itself is a neutral. It's a neutral. It becomes negative or positive based on how we respond to it. So, by thinking about becoming conflict ready, you're preparing yourself to make sure that all your interactions around conflict are positive ones because you have the skill and the mindset and you've had good experiences, which I expect you to have, around conflict so that it doesn't feel like a negative thing. I have to say that it's been my superpower over the past 40 years, knowing that really whatever happens, I am prepared to take that on and come out with a good outcome. Quick story, I was at an airport delayed, and it had been delayed for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And then after 4 hours, they just stopped reporting about the delay, and people were so upset that they were getting a little rowdy. They actually had to call security for the desk agents to protect them. That's how challenging the situation was getting. And we were all waiting online to either find out when the plane was going to actually go out or reschedule on another airline, or for some people, stay over. And the word had been that no one was going to stay over, no one was getting food vouchers. And as I was watching the desk agents and how people were interacting with them, I realized this is a conflict and this is a negative conflict. And I thought, well, how do I want to respond in this moment? I want to be positive in this because I have empathy for the desk agents. I see how people are treating them. And I want them to know that they are seen and appreciated. And so I start my conversation with, thank you very much for everything that you're doing. I see how hard it is, how difficult people are doing, but I also see you smiling and doing your best. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Well, taking that little bit of time to acknowledge them and their situation, even in the midst of conflict, made a big difference to them. And a big difference to me because I walked away with a hotel voucher and food vouchers, right? That problem did not stop me. I was able to move past it because I put on my empathy hat. I read the room and recognized that I could be a sense of peace and calm for somebody else who is in the midst of conflict. Conflict actually can unite people. And I am always careful about saying this because I'm much aware of domestic violence and other kinds of situations where people are manipulated. But sometimes when a team comes together to work through a difficult situation, they begin to see each other as more capable and in a new light. So it can be a good thing to experience some stress around maybe adding or integrating a new practice. And don't worry about that as long as people are open and communicating effectively. It should be fine. And then all of this requires practice. You can't just start and think you're going to be great. This is not one of those things. It will require you to practice shifting your mindset. Best way to do that is to make sure that before you say something, you're taking that pause and taking that 5-second breath because it gives you a chance to one, reset your mindset, shift into the stance where you're going to be open and collaborative and curious, um, and practice. You're going to practice. And so it's not going to be the first conversation, it's not going to be the second, but before you know it, the right words, which are neutral and affirming and open, are going to be flowing out of your mouth on a regular basis. You'll just be thinking about it in that kind of stance, like I need to be curious and helpful, but I also need to be direct and clear, and they're going to be great, but you got to practice. And that's why I'm excited to share with you Talkola, which is my AI powered voice enabled micro learning center. It's a conflict simulator that allows healthcare professionals like you to practice having hard conversations. We will tell you what your conflict style is after an assessment. Then you will take a scenario where you will be the speaker and you'll be speaking to the AI agent who acts as one of your teammates. You'll get some scoring afterwards and some personalized coaching based on your conflict style. It's really helpful to practice getting in the right stance. Your words can open a door or build a wall. Choose carefully. Can't say that enough times or with enough emphasis. Words matter. They're so important. You remember when you were a kid and your parents said sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you? Well, that's not true. Words can help you, hurt you. They can be destructive. They can damage someone's confidence and self esteem so easily. So you want to make sure that you're always thinking about how can I offer up even the most difficult words with kindness and with empathy. Q&A. So we had a couple of questions come in that I want to answer for you before we close things down. How do I manage mean girl culture? Well, the ADA did, their Health Policy Institute did a study and it found that 43% of dental hygienists said they were leaving the profession because of bullying and being in a toxic work environment. So the mean girl question is very relevant. So the first thing you have to do is be self-aware. This is emotional intelligence 101. Realize that you are human, and this is a very hard topic. Women are socialized differently than men. There is the dead even rule, which means that we are all women in a group. We're all supposed to have an equal relationship and equal power. Mean girl culture is really about girls trying to exceed their limit of power, use more power than not. So it might feel hard for you to speak up and speak to that. But recognize that you have to do it and to preserve the psychological safety of the practice. Because you're working through this workshop, you're going to be much more skilled and comfortable doing that. Separate the people from the issues. That's something we don't really learn to do. We just think people are the problem. But actually, people are people and problems are something differently entirely. And so think of it this way. You're sitting at a library table and there's a pile of books between you and somebody else. So much so that you can't see the other person, right? What you're trying to do now is, and you have a problem that you're trying to solve. The books are covering up your ability to see each other. You can stay on each side and try to work to solve it, but it's so much easier if you both get on the same side and then think about how can we move all these books. Same thing with separating the people from the issue. The problem is the problem. You want to join with the other person and collaborate with them to solve the problem. Reverse engineer the missing need. So, with clicks and mobbing, which is another form of emotional abuse in the workplace, where a group of employees get together to make a target, another employee, uncomfortable and bullied, right? And so when you think about why that happens, you want to sort of reverse engineer what need isn't being met that people feel like they need to bully to meet it. So, bullies sometimes have low self esteem. Is there a low self esteem issue with the mean girls? And how can you fix that? Bullies sometimes have not had good home training. They don't recognize how to have a difficult conversation or how to get their way without bullying somebody else. So maybe the underlying need is, more coaching and communication skills. When you think about what the underlying need is, then that gives you another avenue to find a solution to change that behavior. And this is one of the situations where it might not be possible. So think about what the termination trigger is. If you're asking this person to be nicer or avoid saying mean things to a particular person and they don't do it, well, that might be a trigger that leads to their separation. In this situation, you definitely want to be having private conversations, but also protecting people who feel like they've been traumatized by mean girl culture. Uh, and you also want to document everything because while workplace bullying isn't yet illegal, it's well on the way to becoming illegal. Some states are writing legislation about that. So it's just good to be prepared and beginning to follow that kind of process. I struggle with conflict and I want to leave, but I'm afraid to deal with performance issues. Totally get that. Once again, we're back to being self aware. Are you sensing a trend? Emotional intelligence in leadership is very important. You need to understand what triggers you in terms of conflict. Is it a financial conversation? We don't want to talk about compensation. Is it performance? Are you afraid of bullies and you don't want to talk to them? So you have to think about what are the conflicts that really trigger you. You want to explore your deepest worries. Like what I find with dealing with people who are struggling with conflict and conflict avoidance is that they have an idea about what will happen if they engage with the conflict. And usually it's a bad idea. Something will happen to them. But if we sit down and just walk through that and debunk the issue, like what will happen and how likely is it that that will happen? And if that did happen, what could be your response? It gets much easier to think about, okay, maybe I can approach and have this conversation because the things that I was worried about are not really likely to happen. And then here's the other thing is if you don't address performance issues, it is like having a rotten egg in the room. It stinks and everybody smells it, right? You're basically just telling all the other teammates, if you perform badly, go for it because I'm not going to stop you. And telling them I'm not going to protect you. And while there's not really an affirmative law that says you have to protect the employees besides physically from safety issues in the workplace, there's no law around harm. But if you're not helping people feel safe, they're not going to be giving you the best of their efforts. They're going to be thinking about watching their back and protecting themselves, right? So it makes a lot of sense to figure out for yourself if performance issues are hard for you, why are they hard for you? Did you get a lot of feedback in your last role or in past roles so that you're sensitive to giving that to somebody else? Do you just not like having those kinds of conversations? Do you feel like you have to own the solution if somebody else has a performance issue? Whatever it is, figure that out and then start to think about how can you unwind that and find solutions so that you can have those conversations because if you don't, it is definitely going to damage your practice. So that is all for workshop 1, using facts frameworks to have difficult conversations. I would love to hear what you're thinking about. How was this for you? Thank you so much for joining me. Feel free to drop me an email at dina@talkola.com to share your feedback. I would just love it if you would join me for the next workshop. That's Stay Curious, Not Furious, How to Stop Friction Fast. And of course, if you would like to do a 15-minute demo of Talkola, I would love to do that with you. So just shoot me an email. If you want to join our beta, head over to tacola.com/trailblazer. We're going to be starting our beta at the beginning of November 2025. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day and be conflict ready. This is Dina Eisenberg signing out.